What comes to mind when you think of Chinatown? Likely, you'd imagine dragon dances, Lunar New Year festivals, xiaolongbao, and red pockets. Maybe the iconic fish tank at every Chinese restaurant. Chinatown serves as an example of American diversity and the abundance of immigrant communities. But what helped Chinatown develop into what it is today? We have to start at the beginning of Chinese immigration into the United States, emerging in the mid-1800s. An influx of immigration from China arrived during the mid-1800s, many seeking refuge from the economic and political chaos in China. They were uniquely shunned from America, being the first population to be specifically barred from immigrating to the US. Chinese workers, mainly peasant farmers or otherwise lower class, immigrated to the US in order to provide a better life for their families back home in China. Immigration was difficult, but was seen as a glimmering hope for many in China, who sent their husbands to America to bring money back home. Most worked laborious jobs, working in gold mines, the railroads, agriculture, or factory jobs, earning less money than their white counterparts due to discriminatory practices by their employers. Due to these practices, Chinese workers were unable to send much income back home, as their money was spent on living expenses and tools that only the Chinese had to pay for. The image of Chinese immigrants was poor. The media often portrayed the Chinese as criminals, or the reason behind a poorly performing economy. The media criticized not just the male workers, but the women as well. The media was scathing, often calling for the removal of Chinese immigrants or degrading the Chinese community, referring to them as rats or undeserving of America. White laborers would intimidate or kill Chinese workers, forcing them to live in enclaves and seek labor absent of white competition. This, combined with racial discrimination and further exacerbated by the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, helped establish Chinatowns as a community space for Chinese immigrants. The act was later repealed during World War II as America and China formed an alliance, and in 1965, restrictions upon immigration greatly loosened, allowing for families and relatives to immigrate into the US through family reunification, generating a great influx of Chinese immigrants. Chinatowns offered a familiar space, a home for Chinese immigrants in a foreign land. It also provided job opportunities that would not have been offered elsewhere due to discrimination, as well as providing a close-knit community for residents. As the Chinese population grew in the US, so did a number of Chinatowns. Chinatowns are littered throughout the US, a staple among Americans. They help show the unique diversity of the United States, furnishing their own little slice of China in America. This brings us to the 6 Chinatowns we toured, starting from San Francisco to Seattle, Vancouver, Philadelphia, New York, and DC. One of the unique features of these Chinatowns includes the architecture and structure of their buildings. Many Chinese architectural features in Chinatowns are hybrids of Western and Eastern styles. Some key features of Chinese architecture includes curved roofs, roof tiles, woodwork, and ornamented accents. Throughout many of the Chinatowns we toured, key features of Chinese architecture were displayed throughout the streets. One of the most prominent structures are the massive gates located in each Chinatown, often greatly ornamented and decorated. These structures are known as paifang or pailou. These gates symbolize a partnership or friendly relationship between two countries, in these cases, America and China. This structure, Yunyutan, displays Hu architecture style. This structure originates from southeastern China during the late Qing dynasty and was painstakingly taken apart in China, then reconstructed in Massachusetts at the Peabody Essex Museum. Some key features here include roof tiles, overhanging roofs, and an inward-facing courtyard. These key features are emulated throughout many Chinatowns, this practice originating from San Francisco Chinatown. This brings us to the first Chinatown we toured. Day 1 of our trip, we went to San Francisco. As we toured San Francisco's Chinatown, the first thing we noticed was the abundance of Chinese-style architecture, with pagoda roofs and lantern-style street lamps. Many stores, restaurants, and businesses adopted these structures, wrapping the overall visual appeal of the city together cohesively. Throughout the city, the signature colors of China, red, yellow, and green, littered the streets and buildings. San Francisco's Chinatown's design was strategic in its survival. Following the 1906 earthquake and fires, the original Chinatown was destroyed. The city threatened to move Chinatown from its location. Before the city could even begin to execute their plans, reconstruction of Chinatown had already begun. They began construction of Oriental City as a way to improve the impression of the Chinese and keep their home. This development was successful in its purpose, able to improve the reputation of Chinese people and allow the residents of Chinatown in San Francisco. This Chinatown housed many Chinese immigrants, especially in the particularly restrictive times. Following the earthquake and fire that ravaged San Francisco, the immigration records at City Hall were destroyed, removing all traces of legal papers and citizenship. This provided an opportunity for Chinese immigrants to claim citizenship, since there was no evidence or papers to suggest otherwise. Children and families were brought overseas, as children of U.S. citizens would automatically become citizens as well, bringing an influx of paper sons and paper daughters. Noticeably, most of the businesses belong to long-standing residents and owners. Many of the businesses are owned by tenants, thanks to associations that bought property in the midst of hostility towards the Chinese. Traditional and cultural practices remain in these spaces, performing music and art on the street. On the topic of art and culture, we go to Seattle. Up north in Washington state lies Seattle's Chinatown. Seattle's Chinatown is among the oldest Chinatowns in the U.S., holding a plethora of history and culture. Among the various stores lies a unique tea house, Vital Tea Lounge. As stated on their website, makes you younger, smarter, and twice as sexy. We selected Blue People Ginseng Oolong and jasmine tea as we enjoyed the tea house's scenery. The city's long history with Chinese immigrants helps make traditional establishments such as these maintained and running. We talked to the store owner as she poured us samples of tea, asking about the history of the city.
才几年？
对，但是我们在西雅图，以前我们在那个西雅图当场在市中心里面，到现在已经17年了。哦。现在那2个我们搬到这边了。好，
这个乌龙很好，乌龙这个之后这个甜味道很好。
对，
这个乌龙也是福建的。
乌龙对。这个乌龙就是铁观音嘛，最出名。
对对对。
然后这是玫瑰。这个没有咖啡因的，随时都可以喝。
在想在美国开这个这种茶馆，这个因为主要是中国人喝是吧？
什么人都有。
都有。
只要他喝茶的，他都喜欢。
哦，美国人也做哦。
但是他不像。
The initial settlers of Chinatown had been evicted in 1886, but quickly rebounded by 1889 to 350 residents. By 1914, it had soon developed into a Japantown. An international district of Chinese, Japanese, and Filipino families flourished in this time, housing the second largest Japanese community at the time. However, following the bombing of Pearl Harbor, anti-Japanese sentiments rapidly rose. Despite the growing anti-Asian sentiment, a major breakthrough for Asian Americans occurred when Wing Luke, a business leader and activist, won a major elected office. He was the first Asian American to hold office on the West Coast and would have likely risen to higher positions, but his life was tragically cut short from an airplane accident in 1965. Seattle's Chinatown has faced increasing pressure for redevelopment and construction, becoming an endangered cultural community due to these factors. The community has been more vocal about their wants and needs, however, and are pushing back against the development's plan for their city. More recently, members of the community have been advocating for greater transparency around the Sound Transit's West Seattle and Ballard Link Extensions project, many of which suspect construction is involved. Vancouver's Chinatown is one of the oldest and largest Chinese communities in Canada. Similar to the US, Canada also implemented anti-Chinese laws, barring them from immigration and equal rights. One of the most exclusive features of this Chinatown is the Chinese garden located in the city, being the first Chinese garden to be built outside of China. It features Ming Dynasty-style structure, featuring curved roofs, ornamentation, and arches. Similarly to many Chinatowns in America, Vancouver's Chinatown is also facing a rise in gentrification and redevelopment. The controversial construction of Kiefer Street condo is a part of gentrification and redevelopment efforts. Many Chinatowns are facing destruction due to construction to redevelop the area for a richer audience and infringe upon sites with historical significance. Oftentimes, real estate companies and developers seek lower-income neighborhoods to divide up, using a multitude of means. Other times, the city pitches in to remove or further destroy communities. In many instances, highway construction and urban development is utilized to divide up communities and drive down property value in order to purchase cheaper land. These threaten the very people who make up Chinatown, forcing longtime residents out of their own homes and pushing out old businesses. By the mid-1900s, gentrification was beginning to emerge in communities such as Manhattan's Chinatown. As local governments began to encroach on community spaces, it became clear to residents that something must be done to protect their home. BIDs, or business investment districts, are efforts put forth to encourage economic growth in communities. They've become common in Chinatown communities, for better or for worse. Generally, this includes redeveloping the neighborhood into a more desirable location for residents and businesses by focusing on the aesthetics. Although the intentions may be positive, the impact of bids are often undesirable and promote gentrification. In several Chinatowns, an emphasis on the advertisement of culture is practiced by bids. This exploits the culture to bring in tourists, engaging in touristification, which is essentially selling the culture of a neighborhood to encourage more tourism. Bids may create events directly catered to a younger audience rather than original residents. LA Chinatown exhibits most of these issues, with summer nights hosted by LA's Bid to garner tourism for the exotification of Chinatown and at the expense of smaller businesses. This brings us to Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C.'s Chinatown experienced a similar situation in which one community put greater emphasis on economic development while the other prioritized cultural preservation and community. This Chinatown had initially been proposed a convention center and sports complexes by urban planners in 1972. Community leaders protested against this, forcing urban planners to move their sports center elsewhere. In exchange, however, the community leaders had to work with the city to turn Chinatown into a tourist location. Ultimately, DC's Chinatown honed in on the redevelopment of their neighborhood, emphasizing the exoticness of Chinese architecture and design. They had chosen to set a requirement for every business within a certain area to maintain a visual cultural aspect of its interior and exterior design. Through DC Chinatown, many of the buildings incorporate Chinese architectural design and features, regardless of how relevant the building is to Chinatown or Chinese culture. A hotel I sat at was decorated in Chinese design, incorporating dragons, and in the past, a large red banner to advertise the hotel. Additionally, within the hotel, there was an art mural, painted by a Taiwanese artist, installed to meet the criteria set by the city. Despite the business's lack of relevance to Chinatown, it still featured cultural designs. These efforts of visual attraction and advertisement of DC's Chinatown's culture gave little back to the community. Ultimately, the residents of DC Chinatown no longer live within the area, moving to the suburbs instead. Philadelphia's Chinatown also faced a similar circumstance as DC and LA, wrestling with urban developers over the destruction of central structures and establishments. One major building was the Holy Redeemer Church, which had acted as not only an important place of worship for the majority of the Catholic Chinese population, but also an education center. The destruction of the church would not simply remove the building, but also its services, and would force people to move, ultimately destroying the community. Deconstruction was averted when residents protested, climbing on top of rubble, forcing workers to stop. A lack of community cohesion and agreement comes at the detriment of many Chinatowns, leading us to one of Philadelphia Chinatown's largest obstacles. Primarily, this was between the older and younger generation of residents. Many older residents believed tourism would bring prosperity to Chinatown, while the younger strongly disagreed, citing that this would only sell out Chinatown. During this conflict, Philadelphia Chinatown was split by the Vineyard Expressway. This, however, brought the two sides together to unify against gentrification and to protect their Chinatown from urban developers. Currently, Philadelphia's Chinatown is fighting the impending construction of the Sixers Stadium. They fear a repeat of DC's Chinatown, a removal of all residents and the spirit of Chinatown. Philadelphia Chinatown has always had to fight for its home, and this time is no different. The people aren't afraid to fight for their home, and it won't stop here. The architectural independence from what is popular in tourism signifies a strong voice and drive of the people. It shows through with the arena protests and the recent plans to cap the Vineyard Express, reconnecting the two parts of Chinatown together again. Without these strong voices, these things wouldn't have been accomplished. New York City is a major gateway city for American immigrants, creating large ethnic clusters throughout its neighborhood, particularly Flushing, Queens. It houses a large concentration of Asian immigrants, making up over half of Flushing's population. Flushing received immigrants from all over China, resulting in a very diverse community. This sets Flushing apart from other Chinatowns through its diversity and commercial elements combined with a variety of different foods and cultures. Flushing is much less focused on the aesthetics of the city, as it lacks many of the features seen in places such as San Francisco Chinatown. In the 1970s, the bid of Manhattan's Chinatown proposed self-orientalism, or packaging itself in a digestible way for and to attract tourists. However, this idea did not get support from locals, as they argued immediate concerns and needs overrode the need for tourism. Additionally, Manhattan's Chinatown's population was growing and attracting tourism by itself, benefiting the economy even without a plan, leaving it in the dust. It's important to reflect upon the changes made in your community, what are being made, and for who they're changing for. Chinatown's resistance to city development with a strong unity among residents have proven to be more effective in their demands and protection of their homes. Most often, this resistance is correlated with a lack of Chinese aesthetics or architectural alterations to fit the idea of a Chinatown. Even if certain groups step on each other's toes, when push comes to shove, successful communities cooperate with one another to achieve their goals. It's not necessarily a matter of who is right or who is wrong, but rather how well we can work together as a community to preserve this space as it's been a home for Asian Americans for so many generations.